Hello. How's it going? Anybody here yet? What day is it? Asking a bunch of questions. It's Wednesday. Of course it's Wednesday. Look at that pup. Look at him. Look at that puppy. He deserves a treat. Varmos is here. It's Wednesday. It's Wednesday. That's right. It's what Link calls it. Wednesday. That was my best Link, I'm sorry. It wasn't very good. It doesn't look like anyone else. Oh wait, Sharkies. Sharkies are eating dinner as they watch. What you eating, Sharkies? Hi. I don't know. I didn't see your initial post. Hup. Ha. Yeah. I sound more like Mario. Lemonade. Noodles, garlic bread, and broccoli stuffed chicken from Costco. That sounds very tasty. What kind of noodles? Is there any sauce on them, or is this all like just plain noodles? You just got like a pot of spaghetti noodles without anything on them, and having bites of those in between broccoli stuffed chicken. It wouldn't be awful. It would just be a little weird. Just a little. I don't usually. I have plain rice, but I don't usually have plain noodles. Noodles need something on them. Some kind of sauce or flavor. I wonder why that is. No sauce. Yeah, today Farmhouse and I have both also been quite low energy today. We were talking about that. So you're just having plain noodles. It's a little unusual. I gotta say it. I'm sorry for being judgmental, but it's a little unusual. Is my chair really low? I feel like I'm. Well, it's as high as it'll go right now. I mean, even just like a little oil with a couple of herbs in it would make an alright sauce, but. Yeah. I think it's only unusual in like a cultural way or something, like expectations. Because like I like noodles. I love noodles. Noodles are great. But and there's nothing wrong with plain noodles, like really. Like it's like I said, plain rice. There's not that different really. Um but a tired sandwich instead of noodles. Doodles? Did I say doodles? Dry noodles? Doodles? Droodles? No, droodle sounds too interesting. We're just ordering burgers for dinner. Getting some Red Robin because, as mentioned, we were also both quite low energy today. I had to kind of force myself into the shower because my hair was sort of a tangled mess and I needed to comb it out, and I can really only properly comb my hair if it's got conditioner in it. When it's in the process of being washed, that's when it also gets combed out. I mean, I can get my fingers through it now because I have just done that, but So that's why it's a little down today. A little. Look at that pup. Farmhouse's non-takeout tired food is usually a can of beans with salsa, toast, and maybe an egg and or cheese. My non-takeout tired food is usually something unhealthy like instant ramen, Chef Boyardee, or some kind of canned thing like that. Maybe craft dinner. Craft dinner is slightly more energy than the previous two options. Recipe, this is a story from a cookbook. It's funny, when I'm doing the stream, Ben does not sleep in that bed right there. But if we're doing something else in this room, he will go into that bed. It's just while I'm doing this, he's like, no. Or maybe it's to do with Farmhouse being in the other room and me being in this room or something like that. But I think if only one of us is home, or if Farmhouse is like doing schoolwork at the computer, he will go in that bed. It was called Snappy Lunch. We've put our order in for food for tonight, but for delivery a little later. I am gonna get a scorpion burger, which has, like spicy sauce and jalapeno nickels or whatever, and a poutine. Not really a healthy dinner, but a lazy one. But it should be good. So, I've been looking forward to getting back to this. We're at the point of the book where if I were just reading it on my own, I would just finish the book. Like I would have finished it last week when we got to where we did. I would have been like, nope, gotta keep going, gotta power through and finish it tonight. But I read faster when I'm not reading out loud, I think, and talking about it and everything. Early in the pandemic, Mrs. had a conversation about how glad you are to have kids to feed because it keeps you from just eating cereal for every meal. Sister-in-law said cereal every meal would make her sick. I said it would make me sick too, but I'd still do it. I don't actually eat cereal that often myself. Yeah, it's actually pretty rare for me. Every now and then I'll have like a period of time where I basically remember that cereal exists, and then I'll have it for breakfast pretty regularly, and then I'll just kind of forget about it again or something. I don't know what it is. Scorpion burger and poutine sounds amazing to Mister. Yeah, every now and then. I haven't had. It's funny, for the first like 25 years of my life, I think I maybe had Red Robin like once or twice. But over the past 10 years or so, I think I've had it a lot more regularly. Not regularly, but more frequently than that. Are there any food places that seem like they're very popular that they're just not a part of your life experience? Like for me, Pizza Hut. I think I've had Pizza Hut like twice ever. Maybe 3 times, but that's pushing it. Not so super shelbs. BWW. Hello? Not so super shelbs, and I don't know what you mean by that. We're just about to read some book. Buffalo Wild Wings is the restaurant that you just. I don't actually know if we have those around here. I live in Canada. I'm not familiar with Buffalo Wild Wings as a chain. I'm assuming it's a chain. Sharky's, last time they were at Red Robin, the only spicy option was the 5 Alarm burger. I don't. Yeah, when something's labeled like five alarm, I like spicy food, but I don't. But I also like spicy food that tastes good. Like it's got to be like hot sauce as an example. I don't like hot sauce that is just hot. It's got to have a good flavor to it. They have Buffalo Wild Wings in Ontario. Okay, so it does exist in Canada, but maybe not on our coast because I'm over on the Vancouver, British Columbia side of the world. The only spicy option, yeah. Oh, cat turtle. Can I read Harry Potter? I have read Harry Potter, not on stream. Um, there are a couple of things regarding that series. Um, First of all, it's a fairly recent series and it's a very popular series. And I am a little worried about getting copyright strikes or anything like that, about, getting shut down for, I don't know if I would need to get publisher's permission or something. So I've mostly been sticking to older books that I quite enjoy. And then there's a lot of controversy around the author, and while I have read those books a few times, and there are parts of them that I quite enjoy, um, I don't enjoy reading them as much these days. Can I read 50 Shades of Grey? I cannot. I'm actually incapable. Mrs. didn't ever try Indian food or Vietnamese food until adulthood, which now seems crazy since it's fairly usual for either now. I don't actually remember the very first time I had Vietnamese food. And definitely when I was, oh, hey, no worries, Captain Turtle. I wasn't sure if maybe, like, I was wondering whether you were serious with the second suggestion or not. But yeah, now I have pho, like, every other week. Um, but and Indian food, I'm sure I have had throughout my life. I remember the first time I had sushi, um, which was really also probably like one of the first times I actually used chopsticks. You were, but you're one, but if I'm incapable. Well, we are actually still in the middle of this book. Well, not in the middle. We're actually fairly close to the end. So I'm definitely going to finish this before I start looking for suggestions for the next book to read. Um, but yeah, let's see. What was I talking about? Right, Japanese food. Well, not Japanese food, but sushi specifically. The first time I had, I was around 20 years old. Yeah, I do. I also have been reading books that hmm, are, I don't want to say family friendly exactly. We did have some swearing in guards, but I would still consider that mostly younger audience appropriate. I have read this series. We have yet to read. So far on this stream, we've read The Hobbit, Guards, and now we're almost done Pawn of Prophecy. I've read all of them before. Um, they're all books and series that are near and dear to my heart. Um, I've read these. I've read the Belgariad, which this is the first book in the series of. Um, I've read this series many times. Likewise with the Hobbit. Um, Mrs. Sharkey's family are really big into fish, so you actually ate sushi in the early '90s, long before any other kids ate it. Yeah, I just never did until I was about 20 years old. And likewise, like I said, I don't think I ever really used chopsticks. I think I used chopsticks for the first time when I was like 20. And I remember being somewhat apprehensive about it because having seen them on shows and things like I want to say Rupert. There was an episode of Rupert where they were eating with chopsticks, and he like tried to pick up a meatball or something, and it flew and landed in someone's drink. And so I had this preconception that chopsticks were difficult to use, but uh, I think I picked it up pretty easily. Actually, like the first time using them, I was like, "Oh, this isn't so bad. This is fine." You like my dino? Thank you. I got him as a present for Christmas, and then for New Year's he got the hat. Apologies for popping in. Don't apologize. I'm happy to have new people. You're looking for a tarot reading. I've got a friend who does tarot reading, and I've had cards read for me a couple of times. You've never heard of Pawn of Prophecy. It's well, if you want to hear me read it, all of the previous chapters are up under the same name, Sleet Reads, on YouTube. But we are relatively near the end of this first book. It is the first of five, so it's not the end of the story. But as I get going here, in any moment now, I guess I should probably get started. I will be a little late in the book. But, I do, yeah, we've read a few books on stream here, and just we talk about them and all that, and just chat about also random stuff like food, apparently. Last question before you head for a tarot reading. What book or series did I want to throw across the room when I finished? The second book of His Dark Materials, The Subtle Knife. That one. Yep. I enjoyed the first one. I really liked The Golden Compass. It was a fun book. This wasn't on stream or anything. It was just reading for myself. Yeah, I quite enjoyed The Golden Compass, but when I got to the second book, The Subtle Knife, I did not enjoy it to the point where that's one of the few series where I just haven't finished the series because I disliked the second book so much that I never got to the third one. Sharky say The Subtle Knife was a difficult one. Yeah, I didn't like it. It basically, everything that I enjoyed about The Golden Compass was either ignored or just gone. And then it introduced new characters that I didn't like. And it was just sort of unpleasant for me through the whole book. Like the events of the book, which, I'll try not to spoil in saying, but essentially what happened, especially to like the main character throughout that book, I just didn't like it. Yeah. Not an enjoyable read for me. Which, it was disappointing, but that's the one that stands out for me the most. The third one, whose name escapes Farmhouse right now, was less of a departure, but still really weird. You'll look into it as a book that I didn't like. Are you thinking that that your taste runs opposite to mine, and therefore, if I didn't like it, then you might? I know it's a somewhat. Oh, I see. I guess I didn't understand because generally, if I like something, I don't throw it. I tend to try to take care of the things that I enjoy. So yeah, don't take that necessarily as a recommendation. I wanted to throw it across the room because I didn't like it. All right, well, it's just about 7:20 my time, so we've been here. It's already in your Amazon cart. All right. Well, I'm going to get on to chapter 17 of Pawn of Prophecy here. We're on page 214 out of 262. Farmhouse is recommending the Bedlam Stacks, but you should read The Watchmaker of Filigree Street first. Yeah. I was going to say good luck with the tarot reading, but I guess that's not necessarily how that works, is it? All right, everyone ready? Chapter 17. Um, so in the last chapter, Garion followed the man in the green cloak through the sort of ruins of the capital city of Val Alorn. Well, through the palace specifically, the ruins of the palace. Um, and found that this man had found a place where he could eavesdrop on the Council of Kings. And that finally was serious enough to Garion that he remembered that he needed to take action on this, that he needed to actually let somebody know that this was going on. Sharky's felt the way Not So Super Shelbs was looking for at the end of the Midnight series by Scott Westerfeld. The Midnight series. So, where we left Garion, he was headed for Barak's room, where Barak has locked himself in and won't speak to anyone, so we'll see how that goes. Interesting choice. I suppose probably anyone else that he could speak to at the, that would listen to him is probably busy. Basically, everyone else is in the council, I think. So that's probably why Barak is the next choice. And also, of course, Garion knows he can trust Barak. At least he thinks he can trust Barak. Who knows how Barak's doing after recent events. Alright. Chapter 17. Barak! Garion called through the door after he had knocked for several minutes without any answer.
Go away!
Barak's voice came thickly through the door. Barak, it's me, Garion. I have to talk with you. There was a long silence inside the room, and finally a slow movement. Then the door opened. Barak's appearance was shocking. His tunic was rumpled and stained, his red beard was matted, the long braids he usually wore were undone, and his hair was tangled. The haunted look in his eyes, however, was the worst. The look was a mixture of horror and self-loathing, so naked that Garion was forced to avert his eyes.
You saw it, didn't you, boy?
Barak demanded.
You saw what happened to me out there.
I didn't really see anything, Garion said carefully. I hit my head on that tree, and all I really saw were stars.
You must have seen it, Barak insisted. You must have seen my doom.
Doom? Garion said. What are you talking about? You're still alive?
A doom doesn't always mean death,
Barak said morosely, flinging himself into a large chair.
I wish mine did. A doom is some terrible thing that's fated to happen to a man, and death's not the worst thing there is.
Sharky say Barak sounds like a goth teenager. Well, he's gone through some stuff recently. You've just let the words of that crazy old blind woman take over your imagination, Garion said.
It's not only Martier,
Barak said.
She's just repeating what everybody in Cherek knows. An augurer was called in when I was born. It's the custom here. Most of the time, the auguries don't show anything at all, and nothing special is going to happen during the child's life. But sometimes, the future lies so heavily on one of us that almost anyone can see the doom.
That's just superstition, Garion scoffed. I've never seen any fortune-teller who could ever tell who could even tell for sure if it's going to rain tomorrow. One of them came to Faldor's farm once and told Dernick that he was going to die twice. Isn't that silly?
The augurers and soothsayers of Cherek have more skill,
Barak said, his face still sunk in melancholy.
The doom they saw for me was always the same. I'm going to turn into a beast. I've had dozens of them tell me the same thing, and now it's happened. I've been sitting here for 2 days now, watching. The hair on my body is getting longer, and my teeth are starting to get pointed.
You're imagining things, Garion said. You look exactly the same to me as you always have.
You're a kind boy, Garion,
Barak said.
I know you're just trying to make me feel better.
Sharky say he is a teenager. He's going through the change. Wow.
But I've got eyes of my own. I know that my teeth are getting pointed, and my body's starting to grow fur. It won't be long until Anheg has to chain me up in his dungeon, so I won't be able to hurt anyone. Or I'll have to run off into the mountains and live with the trolls.
Nonsense, Garion insisted.
Tell me what you saw the other day,
Barak pleaded.
What did I look like when I changed into a beast?
All I saw were stars from banging my head on that tree, Garion said again, trying to make it sound true.
I just want to know what kind of beast I'm turning into,
Barak said, his voice thick with self-pity.
Am I going to be a wolf? Or a bear? Or some kind of monster no one even has a name for?
Don't you remember anything at all about what happened? Garion asked carefully, trying to blot the strange double image of Barak and the bear out of his memory.
Nothing,
Barak said.
I heard you shouting, and the next thing I remember was the boar lying dead at my feet, and you lying under that tree with his blood all over you. I could feel the beast in me, though. I could even smell him.
All you smelled was the boar, Garion said, and all that happened was that you lost your head in all the excitement.
Berserk, you mean?
Barak said, looking up hopefully. Then he shook his... What a thing to be hopeful for. Did I go berserk? That would be great. Then he shook his head.
No, Garion. I've been berserk before. It doesn't feel at all the same. This was completely different.
He sighed. You're not turning into a beast, Garion insisted.
I know what I know,
Barak said stubbornly. And then Lady Merel, Barak's wife, stepped into the room through the still open door. Oh boy. I see that my lord is recovering his wits, she said.
Leave me alone, Merel,
Barak said.
I'm not in the mood for these games of yours.
Games, my lord? She said innocently. I'm simply concerned about my duties. If my lord is unwell, I'm obliged to care for him. That's a wife's right, isn't it?
Quit worrying so much about rights and duties, Merel,
Barak said.
Just go away and leave me alone.
My lord was quite insistent about certain rights and duties on the night of his return to Val Alorn, she said. Not even the locked door of my bedchamber was enough to curb his insistence.
All right,
Barak said, flushing slightly.
I'm sorry about that. I'd hoped that things had changed between us. I was wrong. I won't bother you again.
Sharkies like Barak a little less now, yet it's not a good look. Bother, my lord, she said. A duty is not a bother. A good wife is obliged to submit whenever her husband requires it of her. Oh boy. No matter how drunk or brutal he may be when he comes to her bed. No one will ever be able to accuse me of laxity in that regard. Ugh.
You're enjoying this, aren't you?
Barak accused. Enjoying what, my lord? Her voice was light, but there was a cutting edge to it.
What do you want, Merel?
Barak demanded bluntly. I want to serve my lord in his illness, she said. I want to care for him and watch the progress of his disease. Each symptom as it appears.
Do you hate me that much?
Barak asked with heavy contempt.
Be careful, Merel. I might take it into my head to insist that you stay with me. How would you like that? How would you like to be locked in this room with a raging beast?
If you grow unmanageable, my lord, I can always have you chained to the wall, she suggested, meeting his enraged glare with cool unconcern. Barak, Garion said uncomfortably. I wonder why. I have to talk to you.
Not now, Garion,
Barak snapped. It's important. There's a spy in the palace.
A spy?
A man in a green cloak, Garion said. I've seen him several times. Many men wear green cloaks, Lady Merel said.
Stay out of this, Merel,
Barak said. He turned to Garion.
What makes you think he's a spy?
I saw him again this morning, Garion said, and I followed him. He was sneaking along a corridor that nobody seems to use. It passes above the hall where the kings are meeting with Mr. Wolf and Aunt Pole. He could hear every word they said. How do you know what he could hear? Merel asked, her eyes narrowing. I was up there too, Garion said. I hid not far from him, and I could hear them myself, almost as if I were in the same room with them.
What does he look like?
Barak asked. He has sandy-colored hair, Garion said, and a beard, and, as I said, he wears a green cloak. I saw him the day we went down to look at your ship. He was going into a tavern with a Murgo. There aren't any Murgos in Val Alorn, Merel said. There's one, Garion said. I've seen him before. I know who he is. He had to move around the subject carefully. The compulsion not to speak about his dark-robed enemy was as strong as always. Even the hint he had given made his tongue seem stiff and his lips numb.
Who is he?
Barak demanded. Garion ignored the question. And then, on the day of the boar hunt, I saw him in the forest.
The Murgo?
Barak asked. No, the man in the green cloak. He met some other men there. They talked for a while not far from where I was waiting for the boar to come. They didn't see me.
There's nothing suspicious about that,
Barak said.
A man can meet with his friends anywhere he likes.
I don't think they were his friends exactly, Garion said. The one in the green cloak called one of the other men my lord, and that one was giving him orders to get close enough so that he could hear what Mr. Wolf and the kings were saying.
That's more serious,
Barak said, seeming to forget his melancholy.
Did they say anything else?
The flaxen-haired man wanted to know about us, Garion said. You, me, Dernick, Silk, all of us. Flaxen-colored hair? Merel asked quickly. The one he called my lord, Garion explained. He seemed to know about us. He even knew about me. Long, pale-colored hair? Merel demanded. No beard? A little older than Barak?
It couldn't be him,
Barak said.
Anheg banished him on pain of death.
You're a child, Barak, she said. He'd ignore that if it suited him. I think we'd better tell Anheg about this. Do you know him? Garion asked. Some of the things he said about Barak weren't very polite. I can imagine, Merel said ironically. Barak was one of those who said that he ought to have his head removed. Barak was already pulling on his mail shirt. Fix your hair, Merel told him in a tone that oddly had no hint of her former rancor in it. You look like a haystack.
I can't stop to fool with it now,
Barak said impatiently.
Come along, both of you. We'll go to Anheg at once.
There was no time for any further questions, since Garion and Merel almost had to run to keep up with Barak. They swept through the great hall, and startled warriors scrambled out of their way after one look at Barak's face.
My lord Barak,
one of the guards at the door of the council hall greeted the huge man.
One side,
Barak commanded, and flung open the door with a crash. King Anheg looked up, startled at the sudden interruption.
Welcome, cousin,
he began.
Treason, Anheg!
Barak roared.
The Earl of Yarvik has broken his banishment and set spies on you in your own palace. Yarvik,
Anheg said.
He wouldn't dare. He dared, all right,
Barak said.
He's been seen not far from Val Alorn, and some of his plotting has been overheard.
Who is this Yarvik? The Raven Warder asked. I need to find a slightly... I had a different voice for a brand, but I don't remember.
An earl I banished last year,
Anheg said.
One of his men was stopped, and we found a message on him. The message was to a Murgo in Sendaria, and it gave the details of one of our most secret councils. Yarvik tried to deny that the message was his, even though it had his own seal on it, and his strong room bulged with red gold from the mines of Cthul Murgos. I'd have had his head on a pole, but his wife's a kinswoman of mine, and she begged for his life. I banished him to one of his estates on the west coast instead.
He looked at Barak.
How did you find out about this?
He asked.
Last I heard, you'd locked yourself in your room and wouldn't talk to anybody.
My husband's words are true, Anheg, Lady Merel said in a voice that rang with challenge.
I don't doubt him, Merel,
Anheg said, looking at her with a faintly surprised expression.
I just wanted to know how he learned about Yarvik, that's all.
This boy from Sendaria saw him, Merel said, and heard him talk to his spy. I heard the boy's story myself, and I stand behind what my husband said, if anyone here dares to doubt him. Garion? Aunt Pole said, startled. May I suggest that we hear from the lad? Chohag of the Algars said quietly. A nobleman with a history of friendship for the Murgos, who chooses this exact moment to break his banishment, concerns us all, I think.
Tell them what you told Merel and me, Garion,
Barak ordered, pushing Garion forward. Your Majesty, Garion said, bowing awkwardly, I've seen a man in a green cloak hiding here in your palace several times since we came here. He creeps along the passageways and takes a lot of trouble not to be seen. I saw him the first night we were here, and the next day I saw him going into a tavern in the city with a Murgo. Barak says there aren't any Murgos in Cherek, but I know that the man he was with was a Murgo.
How do you know?
Anheg asked shrewdly. Garion looked at him helplessly, unable to say Ashrak's name. Well, boy? King Rodar asked. Garion struggled with the words, but nothing would come out. Maybe you know this Murgo, Silk suggested. Garion nodded, relieved that someone could help him. You wouldn't know many Murgos, Silk said, rubbing his nose with one finger. Was it the one we met in Dareen, perhaps? And later in Muros? The one known as Asherak? Garion nodded again.
Why didn't you tell us?
Barak asked. I couldn't, Garion stammered.
Couldn't?
The words wouldn't come out, Garion said. I don't know why, but I've never been able to talk about him. Then you've seen him before, Silk said. Yes, Garion said. And you've never told anybody? No. Silk glanced quickly at Aunt Pole. Is this the sort of thing you might know more about than we would, Polgara? He asked. She nodded slowly. It's possible to do it, she said. It's never been very reliable, so I don't bother with it myself. It is possible, however. Her expression grew grim.
The Grolims think it's impressive, Mr. Wolf said. Grolims are easily impressed.
Come with me, Garion, Aunt Pole said.
Not yet,
Wolf said. This is important, she said, her face hardening.
You can do it later, he said. Let's hear the rest of his story first. The damage has already been done. Go ahead, Garion. What else did you see?
Garion took a deep breath. All right, he said, relieved to be talking to the old man instead of the kings. I saw the man in the green cloak again that day we all went hunting. He met in the forest with a yellow-haired man who doesn't wear a beard. They talked for a while, and I could hear what they were saying. The yellow-haired man wanted to know what all of you were saying in this hall.
You should have come to me immediately,
King Anheg said. Anyway, Garion went on, I had that fight with the wild boar. I hit my head against a tree and was stunned. I didn't remember what I'd seen until this morning. There you go. After King Fulrak called Dernick here, I went exploring. I was in a part of the palace where the roof is all fallen in, and I found some footprints. I followed them, and then after a while I saw the man in the green cloak again. That was when I remembered all this. I followed him, and he went along a corridor that passes somewhere over the top of this hall. He hid up there and listened to what you were saying. How much do you think he could hear, Garion? King Chohag asked. You were talking about somebody called the Apostate, Garion said, and you were wondering if he could use some power of some kind to awaken an enemy who's been asleep for a long time. Some of you thought you ought to warn the Errands and the Tolnedrans, but Mr. Wolf didn't think so. And Dernick talked about how the men of Sandaria would fight if the Angarax came. They appeared, startled. Sharky say, even though this is medievalish, if the castle in Cherrick is 3,000 years old, it would be like living in the Egyptian pyramids and just building on top of it. Yep. I mean, assuming that you were living in the Egyptian pyramids, but you were a pharaoh, and you didn't have anything else to do, so you wanted to build your own pyramids, and you didn't have that much space, I guess, and you didn't want to go off somewhere else, so you just kept building more pyramids on top of the existing pyramids. It's pyramids all the way down. They appeared startled. I was hiding not far from the man in the green cloak, Garion said. Lily Fay, hello! I don't know how well you can see it on this side, but the dragon has got a spot on the wall now. You're sorry you're late, no worries. Though we are in the middle of an exciting chapter. It has a home, yes. Alright, so Garion is just telling the Council of Kings in Val Alorn about how the Earl of Yarvik has sent a spy to spy on them in the palace. That's where we're at. We're in the middle of that. I was hiding not far from the man in the green cloak, Garion said. I'm sure he could hear everything that I could. Then some soldiers came, and the man ran away. That's when I decided that I ought to tell Barak about all this. Up there, Silk said, standing near one of the walls and pointing at a corner in the ceiling of the hall. The mortars crumbled away. The sound of our voices carries right up through the cracks between the stones into the upper corridor. This is a valuable boy you've brought with you, Lady Polgara, King Rodar said gravely. If he's looking for a profession, I think I might find a place for him. Gathering information is a rewarding occupation, and he seems to have certain natural gifts along those lines. He has some other gifts as well, Aunt Pole said. He seems to be very good at turning up in places where he's not supposed to be.
Don't be too hard on the boy, Polgara, King Anheg said. He's done us a service that we may never be able to repay.
Garion bowed again and retreated from Aunt Pole's steady gaze.
Cousin,
Anheg said then to Barak,
it seems that we have an unwelcome visitor somewhere in the palace. I think I'd like to have a little talk with this lurker in the green cloak. I'll take a few men, Barak said grimly. We'll turn your palace upside down and shake it, and see what falls out. I'd like to have him more or less intact, Anheg cautioned. Of course, Barak said. Not too intact, however. As long as he's still able to talk, he'll serve our purposes. Barak grinned. I'll make sure that he's talkative when I bring him to you, cousin, he said. A bleak, answering grin touched Anheg's face, and Barak started toward the door. Then Anheg turned to Barak's wife. I'd like to thank you also, Lady Merel, he said. I'm sure you had a significant part in bringing this to us. I don't need thanks, Your Majesty, she said. It was my duty. Anheg sighed. Must it always be duty, Merel? He asked sadly. What else is there? She asked. A very great deal, actually, the king said. But you're going to have to find that out for yourself.
Garion, Aunt Pole said. Come here. Yes, ma'am, Garion said, and went to her a little nervously. Don't be silly, dear, she said. I'm not going to hurt you. She put her fingertips lightly to his forehead.
Well?
Mr. Wolf asked. It's there, she said. It's very light, or I'd have noticed it before. I'm sorry, Father.
Let's see,
Wolf said. He came over and also touched Garion's head with his hand.
It's not serious,
he said. It could have been, Aunt Pole said, and it was my responsibility to see that something like this didn't happen.
Don't flog yourself about it, Pole, Wolf said. That's very unbecoming. Just get rid of it.
What's the matter? Garion asked, alarmed. Yeah, Merel and Barak's relationship is pretty tragic all around. And I mean, I do feel like Merel is the victim. It's, we don't have a full account of everything, and it sounds like things were never exactly happy between them, but it does, to me, feel like Barak's actions were much worse. What's the matter? Garion asked, alarmed. It's nothing to worry about, dear, Aunt Pole said. She took his right hand and touched it for a moment to the white lock at her brow. Garion felt a surge, a welter of confused impressions, and then a tingling wrench behind his ears. A sudden dizziness swept over him, and he would have fallen if Aunt Pole had not caught him. Who is the Murgo? She asked, looking into his eyes. His name is Asherak, Garion said promptly. How long have you known him? All my life. He used to come to Faldor's farm and watch me when I was little.
That's enough for now, Pole, Mr. Wolf said. Let him rest a little first. I'll fix something to keep it from happening again.
Is the boy ill? King Chohag asked.
It's not exactly an illness, Chohag, Mr. Wolf said. It's a little hard to explain. It's cleared up now, though.
I want you to go to your room, Garion, Aunt Pole said, still holding him by the shoulders. Are you steady enough on your feet to get there by yourself? I'm all right, he said, still feeling a little light-headed. No side trips and no more exploring, she said firmly. No, ma'am. When you get there, lie down. I want you to think back and remember every single time you've seen this Murgo, what he did, what he said. He never spoke to me, Garion said. He just watched. I'll be along in a little while, she went on, and I'll want you to tell me everything you know about him. It's important, Garion, so concentrate as hard as you can. All right, Aunt Pole, he said. Then she kissed him lightly on the forehead. Run along now, dear, she said. Feeling strangely light-headed, Garion went to the door and out into the corridor. He passed through the great hall where Anheg's warriors were belting on swords and picking up vicious-looking battle-axes in preparation for the search of the palace. Still bemused, he went through without stopping. Part of his mind seemed half asleep, but that secret inner part was wide awake. The dry voice observed that something significant had just happened. The powerful compulsion not to speak about Asherak was obviously gone. Aunt Pole had somehow pulled it out of his mind entirely. His feeling about that was oddly ambiguous. That strange relationship between himself and dark-robed, silent Asherak had always been intensely private, and now it was gone. He felt vaguely empty and somehow violated. He sighed and went up the broad stairway toward his room. There were a half-dozen warriors in the hallway outside his room, probably part of Barak's search for the man in the green cloak. Garion stopped. Something was wrong, and he shook off his half-daze. This part of the palace was much too populated to make it very likely that the spy would be hiding here. His heart began racing, and step by step he began to back away toward the top of the stairs he had just climbed. The warriors looked like any other Chereks in the palace, bearded, dressed in helmets, mail shirts, and furs, but something didn't seem exactly right. A bulky man in a dark, hooded cloak stepped through the doorway of Garion's room into the corridor. It was Asherak. The Murgo was about to say something, but then his eyes fell on Garion. "Ah," he said softly. His dark eyes gleamed in his scarred face. "I've been looking for you, Garion," he said in that same soft voice. "Come here, boy." Garion felt a tentative tug at his mind that seemed to slip away as if it somehow could not get a sure grip. He shook his head mutely and continued to back away. "Come along now," Asherak said. "We've known each other far too long for this. Do as I say. You know that you must." The tug became a powerful grasp that again slipped away. "Come here, Garion," Asherak commanded harshly. Garion kept backing away, step by step. "No," he said. Asherak's eyes blazed, and he drew himself up angrily. This time it was not a tug or a grasp, but a blow. Garion could feel the force of it, even as it seemed somehow to miss or be deflected. Asherak's eyes widened slightly, then narrowed. "Who did this?" he demanded. "Pulgara? Belgarath? It won't do any good, Garion. I had you once, and I can take you again any time I want to. You're not strong enough to refuse me." Garion looked at his enemy and answered out of some need for defiance. "Maybe I'm not," he said, "but I think you'll have to catch me first." Asherak turned quickly to his warriors. "That's the boy I want," he barked sharply. "Take him!" Smoothly, almost as if it were done without thought, one of the warriors raised his bow and leveled an arrow directly at Garion. Asherak swung his arm quickly and knocked the bow aside, just as the steel-pointed shaft was loosed. The arrow sang in the air and clattered against the stones of the wall a few feet to Garion's left. "Alive, idiot!" Asherak snarled, and struck the bowman a crushing blow to the side of the head. The bowman fell twitching to the stone floor. Garion spun, dashed back toward the stairs, and plunged down 3 steps at a time. He didn't bother to look back. The sound of heavy feet told him that Asherak and his men were after him. At the bottom of the stairs, he turned sharply to the left and fled down a long, dark passageway that led back into the maze of Anheg's palace. And that is the end of chapter 17. That's a bit intense, isn't it? A lot happening there. Farmo says, it's interesting to see how much Aunt Pole really does care about Garion when everyone else was like, we need to get information. Her first priority was helping him. I want to get this stuff out of his head first. Lily says, cliffhanger. Yep. It's 8 o'clock. Chapter 18 is, very short. Yeah, chapter 18 is only 9 pages long. So why don't we go right ahead? If everybody's okay with me just continuing. Farmo says they put some mental WD-40 in there. barked sharply. Tongue twisters. Lily's up for more. Cool. Sharky's okay? If I keep going, it's only another 9 pages. Yeah, things are coming to a head in Val Alorn, and things are a bit more serious here than they have been for the rest of the book, I think. There were serious events previously, but nothing as intensely time sensitive, like nothing quite so immediate, I think, other than maybe that one ambush. All right, page 226, chapter 18. There were warriors everywhere, and the sounds of fighting. In the first instant of his flight, Garion's plan had been simple. All he had to do was find some of Barak's warriors, and he would be safe. But there were other warriors in the palace as well. The Earl of Yarvik had led a small army into the palace by way of the ruined wings to the south, and fighting raged in the corridors. Garion quickly realized that there was no way he could distinguish friend from enemy. To him, one Cherek warrior looked the same as another. Unless he could find Barak or someone else he recognized, he did not dare reveal himself to any of them. The frustrating knowledge that he was running from friends as well as enemies added to his fright. It was altogether possible, even quite likely, that he would run from Barak's men directly into the arms of Yarvik's. The most logical thing to do would be to go directly back to the council hall, but in his haste to escape from Asherak, he had run down so many dim passageways and turned so many corners that he had no idea where he was or how to get back to the familiar parts of the palace. His headlong flight was dangerous. Asherak or his men could wait around any corner to seize him, and he knew that the Murgo could quickly re-establish that strange bond between them that Aunt Pole had shattered with her touch. It was that which had to be avoided at any cost. Once Asherak had him again, he would never let go. The only alternative to him was to find some place to hide. He dodged into another narrow passageway and stopped, panting, with his back pressed tightly against the stones of the wall. Dimly, at the far end of this hallway, he could see a narrow flight of worn stone steps twisting upward in the flickering light of a single torch. He quickly reasoned that the higher he went, the less likely he would be to encounter anyone. The fighting would most likely be concentrated on the lower floors. He took a deep breath and went swiftly to the foot of the stairs. Halfway up, he saw the flaw in his plan. There were no side passages on the stairs, no way to escape, and no place to hide. He had to get to the top quickly, or chance discovery and capture, or even worse.
"Boy!"
A shout came from below. Garion looked quickly over his shoulder. A grim-faced Cherek in mail and helmet was coming up the stairs behind him, his sword drawn. Garion started to run, stumbling up the stairs. There was another shout from above, and Garion froze. The warrior at the top was as grim as the one below, and wielded a cruel-looking axe. He was trapped between them. Garion shrank back against the stones, fumbling for his dagger, though he knew it would be of little use. Then the two warriors saw each other. With ringing shouts, they both charged. The one with the sword rushed up past Garion, while the one with the axe lunged down. The axe swung wide, missed, and clashed a shower of sparks from the stones of the wall. The sword was more true. With his hair standing on end in horror, Garion saw it slide through the downward plunging body of the axeman. The axe fell clattering down the stairs, and the axeman, still falling on top of his opponent, pulled a broad dagger from its sheath at his hip and drove it into the chest of his enemy. The impact as the two men came together tore them from their feet, and they tumbled, still grappled together down the stairs, their daggers flashing as each man struck again and again. In helpless horror, Garion watched as they rolled and crashed past him, their daggers sinking into each other with sickening sounds, and blood spurting from their wounds like red fountains. Garion retched once, clenched his teeth tightly, and ran up the stairs, trying to close his ears to the awful sounds coming from below as the two dying men continued their horrid work on each other. He no longer even considered stealth. He simply ran, fleeing more from that hideous encounter on the stairs than from Asherak or the Earl of Yarvik. At last, after how long he could not have said, gasping and winded, he plunged through the partially open door of a dusty, unused chamber. He pushed the door shut and stood trembling with his back against it. Whew. That was violent. There was a broad, sagging bed against one wall of the room, and a small window set high in the same wall. Two broken chairs leaned wearily in corners, and an empty chest, its lid open, in a third, and that was all. The chamber was at least a place out of the corridors where savage men were killing each other, but Garion quickly realized that the seeming safety here was an illusion. If anyone opened this door, he would be trapped. Desperately, he began to look around the dusty room. Hanging on the bare wall across from the bed were some drapes, and thinking that they might conceal some closet or adjoining chamber, Garion crossed the room and pulled them aside. There was an opening behind the drapes, though it did not lead into another room, but instead into a dark, narrow hall. He peered into the passageway, but the darkness was so total that he could only see a short distance into it. He shuddered at the thought of groping through that blackness with armed men pounding along at his heels. He glanced up at the single window, and then dragged the heavy chest across the room to stand on so that he could see out. Perhaps he might be able to see something from the window that would give him some idea of his location. He climbed on the chest, stood on his tiptoes, and looked out. Towers loomed here and there amid the long slate roofs of the endless galleries and halls of King Anheg's palace. It was hopeless. He saw nothing that he could recognize. He turned back toward the chamber and was about to jump down from the chest, when he stopped suddenly. There, clearly in the dust which lay heavily on the floor, were his footprints. He hopped quickly down and grabbed up the bolster from the long unused bed. He spread it out on the floor and dragged it around the room, erasing the footprints. He knew that he could not completely conceal the fact that someone had been in the room, but he could obliterate the footprints which, because of their size, would immediately make it obvious to Asherak or any of his men that whoever had been hiding here was not yet full grown. When he finished, he tossed the bolster back on the bed. The job wasn't perfect, but at least it was better than it had been. Then there was a shout in the corridor outside and the ring of steel on steel. Garion took a deep breath and plunged into the dark passageway behind the drapes. He had gone no more than a few feet when the darkness in the narrow passageway became absolute. His skin crawled at the touch of cobwebs on his face, and the dust of years rose chokingly from the uneven floor. At first, he moved quite rapidly, wanting more than anything to put as much distance between himself and the fighting in the corridor as possible. But then he stumbled, and for one heart-stopping instant, it seemed that he would fall. The picture of a steep stairway dropping into the blackness flashed through his mind, and he realized that at his present pace there would be no possible way to catch himself. He began to move more cautiously, one hand on the stones of the wall and the other in front of his face, to ward off the cobwebs which hung thickly from the low ceiling. There was no sense of time in the dark, and it seemed to Garion that he had been groping for hours in this dark hallway that appeared to go on forever. Then, despite his care, he ran full into a rough stone wall. He felt a moment of panic. Did the passageway end here? Was it a trap? Then, flickering at one corner of his vision, he saw dim light. The passageway did not end, but rather made a sharp turn to the right. There seemed to be a light at the far end, and Garion gratefully followed it. As the light grew stronger, he moved more rapidly, and soon he reached the spot that was the source of the light. It was a narrow slot low in the wall. Garion knelt on the dusty stones and peered out. Mr. somehow picturing this as a point-and-click adventure game? I hope not. Garion would be at serious risk of being eaten by a grue. The hall below was enormous, and a great fire burned in a pit in the center, with the smoke rising to the openings in the vaulted roof, which lofted even above the place where Garion was. Though it looked much different from up here, he immediately recognized King Anheg's throne room. As he looked down, he saw the gross shape of King Rodar. I'm thinking gross as in large is probably what's meant there. He saw the gross shape of King Rodar and the smaller form of King Chohag, with the ever-present Hetar standing behind him. Some distance from the thrones, King Fulrak stood in conversation with Mr. Wolf, and nearby was Aunt Pole. Barak's wife was talking with Queen Islena, and Queen Poren and Queen Silar stood not far from them. Silk paced the floor nervously, glancing now and then at the heavily guarded doors. Garion felt a surge of relief. He was safe. He was about to call down to them when the great door banged open, and King Anheg, mail-shirted and with his sword in hand, strode into the hall, closely followed by Barak and the Revan warder, holding between them the struggling form of the flaxen-haired man Garion had seen in the forest on the day of the boar hunt.
"This treason will cost you dearly, Yarvik,"
Anheg said, grimly over his shoulder as he strode toward his throne. "Is it over, then?" Aunt Pole asked.
"Soon, Polgara,"
Anheg said.
"My men are chasing the last of Yarvik's brigands in the furthest reaches of the palace. If we hadn't been warned, it might have gone quite differently, though."
Garion, his shout still hovering just behind his lips, decided at the last instant to stay silent for a few more moments. King Anheg sheathed his sword and took his place on his throne.
"We'll talk for a bit, Yarvik," he said, "before what must be done is done."
The flaxen-haired man gave up his hopeless struggle against Barak and the almost equally powerful Brand. "I don't have anything to say, Anheg," he said defiantly. "If the luck had gone differently, I'd be sitting on your throne right now. I took my chance, and that's the end of it."
"Not quite,"
Anheg said.
"I want the details. You might as well tell me. One way or another, you're going to talk."
"Do your worst," Yarvik sneered. "I'll bite out my own tongue before I tell you anything."
"We'll see about that,"
Anheg said grimly. "That won't be necessary, Anheg," Aunt Pole said, walking slowly toward the captive. "There's an easier way to persuade him. I'm not going to say anything, Yarvik told her. I'm a warrior, and I'm not afraid of you, witch woman.
You're a greater fool than I thought, Lord Yarvik, Mr. Wolf said. Would you rather I did it, Pole?
I can manage, father, she said, not taking her eyes off Yarvik.
Carefully, the old man cautioned. Sometimes you go to extremes. Just a little touch is enough.
I know what I'm doing, old wolf, she said tartly. Mansplaining. She stared full into the captive's eyes. Garion, still hidden, held his breath. The Earl of Yarvik began to sweat, and tried desperately to pull his eyes away from Aunt Pole's gaze, but it was hopeless. Her will commanded him, locking his eyes. He trembled, and his face grew pale. She made no move, no gesture, but merely stood before him, her eyes burning into his brain. Then, after a moment, he screamed. Then he screamed again and collapsed, his weight sagging down in the hands of the two men who held him. "Take it away," he whimpered, shuddering uncontrollably. "I'll talk, but please, take it away." Silk, now lounging near Anheg's throne, looked at Hetar. "I wonder what he saw," he said. "I think it might be better not to know," Hetar replied. Queen Islena had watched intently, as if hoping to gain some hint of how the trick was done. She winced visibly when Yarvik screamed, pulling her eyes away.
"All right, Yarvik,"
Anheg said, his tone strangely subdued.
"Begin at the beginning. I want it all."
"It was a little thing at first," Yarvik said in a shaking voice. "There didn't seem to be any harm in it."
"There never does,"
Brand said. The Earl of Yarvik drew in a deep breath, glanced once at Aunt Pole and shuddered again. Then he straightened. "It started about 2 years ago," he said. "I'd sailed to Kotu in Drasnia, and I met a Nadrak merchant named Grashor there. He seemed to be a good enough fellow, and after we'd gotten to know each other, he asked me if I'd be interested in a profitable venture. I told him that I was an earl and not a common tradesman, but he persisted. He said he was nervous about the pirates who live on the islands in the Gulf of Cherek, and an earl's ship manned by armed warriors was not likely to be attacked. His cargo was a single chest, not very large. I think it was some jewels he'd managed to smuggle past the customs houses in Boktor, and he wanted them delivered to Dareen and Sendaria. I said I wasn't really interested. But then he opened his purse and poured out gold. The gold was bright red, I remember, and I couldn't seem to take my eyes off it. I did need money, who doesn't after all, and I really couldn't see any dishonor in doing what he asked. Anyway, I carried him and his cargo to Dareen and met his associate, a Murgo named Asherak." Garion started at the name, and he heard Silk's low whistle of surprise. "As we'd agreed," Yarvik continued, "Asherak paid me a sum equal to what Grashor had given me, and I came away from the affair with a whole pouch of gold. Asherak told me that I'd done them a great favor, and that if I ever needed more gold, he'd be happy to find ways for me to earn it. I now had more gold than I'd ever had at one time before, but it somehow seemed that it wasn't enough. For some reason, I felt that I needed more." "It's the nature of Angarak gold," Mr. Wolf said. "It calls to its own. The more one has, the more it comes to possess him. That's why Murgos are so lavish with it. Asherak wasn't buying your services, Yarvik. He was buying your soul." Yarvik nodded, his face gloomy. "At any rate," he continued, "it wasn't long before I found an excuse to sail to Dareen again. Asherak told me that since Murgos are forbidden to enter Cherek, he'd developed a great curiosity about us and our kingdom. He asked me many questions, and he gave me gold for every answer. It seemed to me to be a foolish way to spend money, but I gave him the answers and I took his gold. When I came back to Cherek, I had another pouch full. I went to Yarvik's home and put the new gold with what I already had. I saw that I was a rich man, and I still hadn't done anything dishonorable. But now it seemed that there weren't enough hours in the day. I spent all my time locked in my strong room, counting my gold over and over, polishing until it gleamed red as blood, and filling my ears with the sound of its tinkling. But after a while, it seemed that I didn't really have very much, and so I went back to Asherak. He said he was still curious about Cherek, and that he'd like to know Anheg's mind. He told me that he'd give me as much gold as I already had if I sent him word of what was said in the high councils here in the palace for a year. At first I said no, because I knew it would be dishonorable. But then he showed me the gold, and I couldn't say no any more." From where he watched, Garion could see the expressions of those in the hall below. Their faces had a curious mingling of pity and contempt as Yarvik's story continued. "It was then, Anheg," he said, "that your men captured one of my messengers, and I was banished to Yarvik's home. At first I didn't mind, because I could still play with my gold. But again it wasn't long before it seemed that I didn't have enough. I sent a fast ship through the Bore to Dareen with a message to Asherak, begging him to find something else for me to do to earn more gold. When the ship came back, Asherak was aboard her, and we sat down and talked about what I could do to increase my hoard." "You're doubly a traitor then, Yarvik," Anheg said in a voice that was almost sad. "You've betrayed me, and you've broken the oldest law in Cherek. No Angarak has set foot on Cherek's soil since the days of Bare Shoulders himself." Yarvik shrugged. "I didn't really care by then," he said. "Asherak had a plan, and it seemed like a good one to me. If we could get through the city, a few at a time, we could hide an army in the ruined southern wings of the palace. With surprise and a bit of luck, we could kill Anheg and the other Alorn kings, and I could take the throne of Cherek, and maybe all of Eloria as well." "And what was Asherak's price?" Mr. Wolf demanded, his eyes narrowing. "What did he want in return for making you king?" "A thing so small that I laughed when he told me what he wanted," Yarvik said. "But he said that he'd not only give me the crown, but a room full of gold if I'd get it for him." "What was it?" Wolf repeated. "He said that there was a boy, about 14, in the party of King Fulrak of Sandaria. He told me that as soon as the boy was delivered to him, he'd give me more gold than I could count, and the throne of Cherek as well." "Well, how about that?" King Fulrak looked startled. "The boy Garion?" he asked. "Why would Asherak want him?" Aunt Pole's single frightened gasp carried even up to where Garion was concealed. "Dernick!" she said in a ringing voice, but Dernick was already on his feet and racing toward the door, with Silk close behind him. Aunt Pole spun, with eyes blazing, and the white lock at her brow almost incandescent in the midnight of her hair. The Earl of Yarvik flinched as her glare fell on him. If anything's happened to the boy, Yarvik, men will tremble at the memory of your fate for 1,000 years, she told him. It had gone far enough. Garion was ashamed and a little frightened by the fury of Aunt Pole's reaction. I'm all right, Aunt Pole, he called down to her through the narrow slot in the wall. I'm up here. Garion? She looked up, trying to see him. Where are you? Up here, near the ceiling, he said. I don't know why this is so funny. It's just so, like, really serious scene, and then, I'm okay. Up here near the ceiling, he said, behind the wall. How did you get up there? I don't know. Some men were chasing me and I ran. This is where I ended up. Come down here at once. Is that a scene from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory where they're like floating up by this ceiling? And they're like, come down here, get down from there. Or is that Mary Poppins? Lily says, yeah. With the fizzy pop. That's what that reminds me of, yeah. There is floating in Mary Poppins, but nobody, I don't think, demands that they come down. Do they? Yeah, they'll love to laugh. Do they demand that he comes down? In one of those, maybe in both, I remember someone being like, what are you doing up there? Get down from there at once. Anyways. I don't know how, Aunt Pole, he said. I ran so far and took so many turns that I don't know how to get back. I'm lost. All right, she said, regaining her composure. Stay where you are. We'll think of a way to get you down. I hope so, he said. And that's the end of chapter 18. We're getting real close to the end. I think we only have 3 chapters to go. So maybe on Friday, I'll try to start reading a little earlier. Like, I mean, I won't start the stream until 7 like normal, but I'll try to start reading a little. Lily says, much better ending this time. Yes, much less of a cliffhanger. There's still some resolutions to take care of, but maybe we'll try to power through on Friday and finish the book. So I'll start at 7 as normal, but I'll start reading a little earlier. I won't do so much preamble, and we'll see if we can power through. How many pages total are left? We're on page 235 out of 262, so just under 30 pages. I think we can do that. We've definitely done near that amount before. So there was some pretty intense stuff in those 2 chapters, huh? We got, well, I'm gonna try and refocus this back here. Oh, it doesn't matter. We got legitimately angry Aunt Pole, and also Aunt Pole using some magic to what's a grue from? It starts with a Z. It's an old school reference. I just can't remember. You Were Eaten by a Grue is from Zork. That's it. It's from Zork, an old text adventure game. Essentially, in order, like, one of the things that you would have to do in Grue was, I think, find a lamp or something like that in order to go into dark spaces so that you could explore them. And basically, I guess in order to keep you from just going into those dark spaces without a lamp, if you went into the dark just without any light, you would be eaten by a Grue. I don't know if it would happen immediately, but eventually it would happen. I've played at least one or two King's Quest games. I don't know if I've ever actually beaten any. I think I played King's Quest 5. I'm not sure. Uh, and it's GRUE. Um, there is a there's a song that mentions grus in it. You were eaten by a gru. It's the same as We Didn't Start the Fire, but it's like the video game version of that. It's worth listening to. It's entertaining. Um, let's see if I can figure out who it's by. I think maybe it's been a while since I listened to the version of it I'm thinking of. It might be Rich Alvarez that sings it, but I'm not certain. But yeah, so we had Cherek warriors killing each other in these chapters. We had the hold on Garion's mind finally being broken, and he being able to freely speak about Asherak. So that seems like kind of a big deal, huh? We had a little more magic than usual. Still nothing like big and flashy. All pretty like subtle mental effects so far. um, yeah, and then Garion running for his life. I spin a little. Oops, kick the camera stand. Oh, puppy. Oh, puppy's licking my hand. Yeah, lots of stuff in in these two chapters, huh? Quite a lot of important events taking place, I feel like. We learned some pretty disgusting things about Barak, really. There's no good way to put it. Barak has done some bad stuff. He has some skeletons in his closet. But we also maybe saw a little bit of a hint of warmth from Merel. It's possible. Lily says it's a slippery slope to becoming the bad guy. Yeah. And I mean, Barak apologized for what that's worth and said that he would never do it again and that she never had to see him again, even. That's not perfect. But it's not nothing either, I suppose. Yeah, that's the part. What Farmos is saying now. We're the ants of King Anthony, and we're coming to help Graham out, or something like that. Um, so yeah, lots of stuff in these two chapters. Quite a lot of excitement. Um, we've still got 3 chapters left to go, and then we'll be done this book. So, if everyone wants to start thinking about what you want me to do next, should we go straight into Queen of Sorcery, which is over here? Got it right there. Should we go straight into Queen of Sorcery, or should we talk about other books again? Because I'd be quite happy personally to go straight into it because, you know, we're still doing this story, but I'd also be totally fine reading something else as well. But something to think about, and I mean, you know, don't feel the need to make your decision until we finish this book, because maybe we'll get to the end and something there will intrigue you so much that you'll want to continue yourself, based just on that. So yeah, I'm gonna go eat a scorpion burger and a poutine. My very healthy dinner. Probably gonna need to warm it up a little, I think. But See everybody on Friday, I think, right? There's nothing that's gonna cause a problem. What is Friday? Friday is the 28th. It's no actual scorpion. It's the name of a burger from Red Robin. Farmos and I work both quite low energy today, so we just ordered some burgers for dinner. So it's just a spicy burger. It's got some jalapeno, like deep fried jalapeno nickels on it, and some some spicy hot sauce. Yes, much safer. Um, yeah, you have a nice evening as well, Lily. Thank you for showing up. Thanks for coming and hanging out. You have any suggestions for anyone I should raid right now? Anyone that's streaming that I should raid out to? I will start that if you've got anybody. You usually have a good suggestion. Slightly stupid bear. No, I'm fine. I'll raid. He seems like a good guy from what little I've seen. Plus, I already know the name. All right. Well, have a good evening, everyone. And hopefully I'll see you here on Friday when we finish Pawn of Prophecy. Isn't that exciting? All right. Have a good night.